Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited today to have a special guest on the channel, my good friend, Dr. Jason Gunnell. Jason is an old friend of mine, and we're going to have a great talk today about how to help ward organists. So let me bring Jason on. I'm going to introduce him, and then we'll get started. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
So let me tell you about my buddy Jason. He won't brag about himself, but I will. Jason and I met way back at BYU, Idaho, at the turn of the century, so to speak. But now Jason is a very gifted and talented and prestigious organist, and he may not think that, but he is. Let me give you a little bit of pedigree. So currently, Jason is the associate director of music and organist at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is a member of the Bach Ensemble. He is a fabulous performer. He has a doctorate from the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, master's from University of Kansas, and as I mentioned, we met at BYU, Idaho 20-odd years ago or more in choir and did a lot of collaborating back then. But he's won some organ competitions. He was a finalist as a tabernacle organist back a few years ago and is a wonderful friend and gifted musician and very passionate about music in the church. So we're excited to have you here, Jason, today. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, before we get into anything else, our main goal today is to help people who are freaked out about being called as a ward organist. So let's just kind of tell this story about what happened to me, right? I mean, I have a doctorate in music. I've been performing my whole life as a singer, conductor, and pianist, but 6 or 7 years ago, the bishop called me in and asked me to be the ward organist, and I like, what? I don't play the organ. What are you talking about? And it was kind of like, yeah, but you play the piano, right? So can't you play the organ too? Isn't it the same? No, it's quite different. So I went out into the car and I'm like, almost in tears that I'm going to be unmasked as he's not a real musician. He can't play the organ. Oh my gosh, right? How do I survive? So I call my buddy Jason Gunnell and say, Jason, just get me through this Sunday. What do I do? So, Jason, what do we do? We're called as a ward organist. We play the hymns on the piano. Maybe we only barely play the hymns on the piano. Gosh, talk us through some things. I have a bunch of questions, but what is the first thing that comes to your mind to help us survive our new calling as ward organists?
Sure. I don't know if I'll be able to be as eloquent as apparently I was 6 or 7 years ago, but it can be very daunting, I imagine. Questions like these can be hard for folks like me who have spent their entire lives at the organ console. I mean, I started when I was 7 or 8 years old, so
Right.
It's sometimes very difficult for people like me to put ourselves in the shoes of people who get that calling, and I can understand it being extraordinarily daunting. The organ can be a very intimidating instrument.
Yeah. Well, let's start with finger technique. Like, just first and foremost, right? That's a big difference between the piano and the organ. When we sit at the piano
Sure.
to play the hymns, we have the benefit of the sustain pedal, the damper pedal, which we don't have to hold our fingers down. We're just used to that kind of technique. So talk us through a couple key pointers about just the basics of finger technique.
Sure. Well, maybe even more basic than that are the similarities and differences between the instruments. I mean,
Sure.
most people that are going to receive the calling have some degree of training at the piano, I would
Yes.
imagine.
Right.
Unless they're very odd and had harpsichord training, which I very much doubt.
Me too.
But you've kind of hit on the fact that the instruments are quite different. Most people who might otherwise be uninitiated with knowing musical instruments might see keyboards and say, "Oh, well, they have keyboards. They must be the same." The organ is one of the oldest instruments that we have, especially that we continue to use. Most ancient instruments fell out of favor along the path in favor of more modern incarnations that we know today. The organ,
the evolution of the French horn or the sackbut becoming the trombone or all these other examples, but the organ is still the organ.
Yeah, the organ is a very old instrument. Thus, the repertoire available that's been written for it is only the only instrument that has more of it is the voice.
Mhm.
So the organ actually has a wealth of repertoire to choose from. But and so it's interesting that the piano, being only about 220 or 230 years old in its modern incarnation, uh, it's the more popular instrument. As far as its availability, I mean, it's a smaller instrument. It's easier to put in the home,
Yeah, not
and
everybody
so
has an
more
organ in their front room, but a lot of people have a piano in their front room.
right. So the piano, by its nature, is a percussion instrument.
Right.
You have a hammer that hits the string vibrates and decays at its natural, the sound decays, and eventually the string stops vibrating and the sound goes away.
Right.
And you're right, you talked about the expression pedal that allows the notes to sustain even when you lift your fingers off the keys. Playing the organ is much like playing the piano without that expression pedal, where the sound on the piano, the sound is dampened without that expression pedal. The organ, the note will sustain only as long as you hold down the key.
Yeah,
Another
it's
difference,
almost an opposite, right? It's like the piano strikes and decays, but the organ is like a singer. It opens and it expresses, well, it used to express air, or if you have a pipe organ, if you're lucky enough, it actually does express air. And the pushing down is like an opening, where pushing down of the key on the piano is like that's that's all you get, and then it goes away. But and that's
right,
that's kind of the intimidating thing for me is, oh boy, every note I hit, it's gonna go, and you're gonna hear it. There's no hiding.
right, exactly. There is no hiding. It can be very scary. And you hit on it with the piano. You have a great degree. Um, you have control over the dynamic expression of the instrument based on how hard or how soft you hit the key, as to how hard or how soft the note is going to be produced. With the organ, because like you said, it's air going through a pipe, it doesn't matter how hard or how soft you hit the note, you get one dynamic. And that sound doesn't waver. It continues to
Right.
produce the sound at that volume until its immediate stop when you release the note.
So if you play a wrong note, we're gonna hear it.
Yes. I teach two of my sons right now at the organ, and I have been for a couple of years. And that's one of the things that I've really had to ingrain in them is that you will make mistakes, they will be heard, and it doesn't matter. It's okay.
Yeah.
We make mistakes, and some with the organ, you are very visible in your mistakes. With a lot of other callings in our church, you can make plenty of mistakes that happen in the privacy of your own home,
Right.
and nobody is aware of them. As you can, like for teaching a lesson, you have so much time to continue to hone what remarks you want to have. You can hone the questions that you want to ask. You have your own personal study where you can perhaps correct some misunderstanding that you might have, or you can solidify the correct understanding of gospel principles that you have. With the organ, you make that mistake, especially when you're in sacrament meeting and everyone gets to hear it. And you know
It's
what?
kind
That's
of like
okay because everyone's rooting for you.
right, and it's kind of like a new bishopric member, right, who's never served in a bishopric, and you're sitting down in the congregation and they're messing up at the pulpit, and they say the wrong thing for the sustainings, and you might think it's just not that hard. Come on, can't you get your words right? Until you get called and you're standing there and you got to say, now wait a minute, how do we say that? And it's one of those, I messed up. It's in front of everybody, so there is a
Right.
bit of like kind of have to get over it and realize that, like you said, everybody is rooting for you. Like, we're hoping you're gonna be fine.
Right. And my oldest has been playing for sacrament meeting for over a year and a half now.
Nice,
And my other one's been playing since the beginning of the year.
awesome.
And, they get over it and they get to know it better. And so, there is that rooting mechanism. I don't attend our ward, this year simply because of my job. So I attend the noon ward, and the ward organist there is obviously aware that I'm in attendance,
Right.
but I make it a point to let her know, hey, I'm just rooting for you. I'm not here to critique your playing. I'm here to worship and to partake the sacrament and to sing the hymns of Zion. So that's what I engage in, and I imagine that most people are that way.
I think so. I think so. And we're going to get to that topic of what is the role of the organ in worship and why do we use it in a little bit. But
Sure.
let's get back to helping. So, okay, we have this understanding of the sound is different. What happens when we strike the key is very different from the piano.
Right.
Let's get into more of that. Like, how do I manage that with my
Yeah.
fingers?
And to boot, you have the pedal board as well, and
Keys,
people can be very intimidated. Oh, I have to play with my feet? Oh dear.
yes. Oh dear.
um, but getting to know the organ and getting to know its differences, getting to know its characteristics and how they differ, or in some cases are similar to the piano, is a real great way to kind of jump in. And there's no better way to do that than to simply go with the organ and start poking around on it and seeing how it's different, especially since you've been called upon to accompany hymns and accompany the sacrament meeting. People can be intimidated by the fact that there are a multitude of voices for the organ. And of course, the question becomes, how on earth do I choose what voices to use at what points? And there's a lot of great resources available to the beginning organist. BYU organ department has done a marvelous job of providing so many resources for the beginning organist and for the ward organist. So it would be of great benefit to the person who's called to look at those.
Yeah, let's drill down on that really quick. Remember, you said something to me that was really helpful. It's like, look, there's so many different stops, and that's what Jason means by voices. There's the different sounds that the organ is programmed to play, whether it's a flute or an oboe or a string or whatever. It's like, which buttons do I push? People will say, like, or which stops do I pull, right? What's like a basic, right? We have the swell manual on the top, usually at an LDS church organ, and we have the great manual. We usually have two. Some organs have more. The swell and the great, and then we have the pedal. Where do I start? Which keyboard should I play on? And what's like a basic stop I can pull that will get me through my first Sunday?
Sure. All of these things are so much better understood when you have a kind of more basic understanding of the instrument.
For sure.
It's easy to say, press this stop. But I think from the beginning, if you understand the nature of the instrument just a little bit better, that makes more sense when you say it. And it also prepares you to be able to go past that in a much quicker manner.
Okay, great.
So you bring up terminology like great, swell, stops. It's very important to understand the nature of the organ. We could talk about its construction when we just, for your listeners, maybe at some point you can pop up a picture of the new organ that we got here where I work. It's a magnificent instrument, and people obviously are very curious about it. And so I'm able to talk a lot about it and describe it, and even sometimes take people up inside of it and show them exactly what I'm talking about. And that kind of experience, or that kind of introduction to the organ, I think really is beneficial.
We'll have to have you back sometime and take your cell phone camera in there and show us around. We'll have to do that another time.
Oh, I'd be happy to do that. But so the organ is set up where you have one pipe for each note on the keyboard. So most American organs have 61 notes on the keyboard. And so organs are designed to have one pipe that's designed in the way proportional to that each pipe sounds generally the same. That's the voice, or a rank of pipes. So you call one row of pipes, one set of 61 pipes, a rank.
And so a rank might be like a rank of string sounds. or a
Correct.
rank of flutes, or like a rank of principal, where so if you press a middle C, I mean, there's many versions of middle C on the organ because middle C belongs to all those different ranks in different
Correct.
voices.
And we're going to talk about that.
Cool.
So you have different voices, and the voices are parsed into families of stops. So you have the principal stops, which are the kind of the foundation sound of the organ. It's the sound that you would expect to hear an organ make.
Great.
Every other voice is imitative of an ancient or modern instrument. So
Okay.
you have the string family, which is imitative of strings, and generally you'll only see these voices at 16-foot pitch, 8-foot pitch, or 4-foot pitch. I'll talk about the pitches in just a second. Um, and often you'll have what's called a celeste, which is a rank that is a companion to the 8-foot string, which is tuned slightly sharp, causing an undulating effect.
That's where you get the
We'll
wah,
talk
wah,
about
wah, wah,
celeste in
wah, wah.
greater detail.
That's where you get the kind of warble sound sometimes, right? A little bit of a wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I like to think of it more slightly ethereal
Okay.
rather than there, because you can turn on a tremulant and have undulation in the tone, and that could fit your definition of wah wah wah
Sure.
as well.
Okay.
So
Good point. Good point.
You have flute, the flute family, which are a family of stops imitative of flutes, and then you have reed stops. They're called reeds because of the nature, the way the tone is produced. The pipe the tone is produced in the pipe by a reed rather than a flute stop, which is kind of like a whistle.
So
a really
like
big,
the difference of playing
really nice.
the difference of playing a flute where you like blow across the top of something versus playing like an oboe or a clarinet where you have a mouthpiece in the mouth and there's a reed and the reed vibrates. Same kind of thing on the organ, right? Some of them are like
Yes,
flutes,
that's correct.
some of them are like reeds.
Yeah. And so most of the brass instruments and woodwind instruments that you would expect to hear that are imitative fall into this category, except for the flute. So trumpet, trombone, bassoon, clarinet, French horn, all of these are reed stops on the organ that are produced by that.
Cool.
And so you have these families of stops. Generally, we talk about the 4 families of stops. And so a collection of these stops are grouped into what we call divisions. And each division is played by one manual. So you have the great division. So the great on a 2-manual organ in LDS churches is always on the bottom manual. And you have a collection of stops that are tied into that. And so when you pull the stop, it'll play on just that manual.
And so that's where, like on the organ, we see on the left panel the different stops. It'll say like pedal, and those are the stops that make the pedal sound. You'll see the swell one. You'll see the great. So each of those correspond to the different either pedal board or keyboards.
That's correct. And I'd say that most LDS organs, especially today, have stop tabs rather than left and right stop jams. But same idea. So if you push the tab, that's what you get.
Right.
And so the great is the chief or the main division or manual. The swell is generally a secondary or a softer division, and it'll often have some of the voices that are more soloistic in nature as well.
Okay.
And then you have the pedal. Now there are devices called couplers that you can employ to bring the sounds of one division and put them on another. So on a typical 2-manual LDS organ, you have the swell, and on the great stop row, you're going to have a thing that says swell to great.
Right.
You press that, and all of the sounds that are available on the swell also are available on the great.
Nice.
And then you can bring the swell down to the pedal and the great down to the pedal as well.
And so the benefit of that is that when you're getting brave enough to have additional sounds, you don't necessarily have to move your hands up and down the different manuals, you can bring in sounds from the swell and mix it in with the sound on the grate, and it's almost like having four hands all of a sudden, because you're bringing in extra instruments,
Right.
only playing the same
It
notes.
right. It expands the resources of voices that are available to you in playing in a chorus.
Yeah.
For the beginning organist, it's probably very important to know, you bring that up, that you should always play on one manual unless you're doing something like soloing out a melodic voice.
Okay.
A lot of people might think that because there are multiple manuals, you can put your hands on different manuals. But when you're doing, especially congregational singing, you want to have all of the voices present
To support
and
the
at
singing.
at the same volume to support the singing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of something that a beginner might come and think, oh, I can play around with doing that, when in fact, we spend our time, many organists spend most of their time with both hands on one manual.
Yeah, let's just go slightly deeper on that before we continue. So, once I got a little braver as I started playing, I started getting a couple of books of prelude arrangements. Like, I like the Jim Cason books a lot. There's Robert Manoogian. There's a bunch of really great resources available from Jackman Music and other places. And so, I looked for the easier ones, but eventually I started getting some of those, and that's when I started doing what you're talking about, of like actually soloing out the tune. So, like in a one arrangement I'm thinking of, Jim tells you to start on the swell, and it's got kind of a basic flute stop and a very basic pedal stop. And then suddenly, as you're going along, the music says GT period, so on the grate. So then suddenly my left hand is playing the swell, and it's sort of the accompanying harmony. And then down on the grate manual, I'm playing the tune on which sounds like a solo instrument in an orchestra. So it's almost like the strings are providing the harmony, which is like my left hand on the swell manual, and a solo oboe is playing the tune, and that's what my right hand is doing. And actually, this whole concept, I think, is another reason why the organ can be so overwhelming. Is you're basically playing an orchestra,
Right.
which brings up all sorts of questions. Which instruments do I use? When do I use them? When do I solo? When do I not solo? When you're starting, like Jason's saying, just stay with the grate and keep it simple. We'll talk about some stop options for you to begin with, but you're not going to try to solo things right away. You're not going to try to be an orchestra master on the organ right away. Your job is to support the singing, and that's done just fine with a few basic stops on the grate. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are correct that all of these things just make it incredibly a daunting task for someone who's called. So, you mentioned what's kind of a basic sound that we can get.
Yeah.
The core backbone of the organ is the principle. Oh, before I get to that, I should talk about the pitch levels.
Oh, do yeah.
So you see on the stops, you see 16, 8, 4, 2, and then some fractional. So you'll see 2 2/3 or 1 3/5. And these are designations that talk about what pitch level or range you expect to hear from that particular row. So you talked about playing middle C. When you play middle C on the organ and you have an 8-foot stop out, that gives you that tenor C or that middle C
middle C
that you're looking for.
Okay.
If you've ever studied string harmonics and know that you have one string, if you play it, you get the bass sound. If you stop that string at its halfway point and you make it vibrate, that's an octave higher.
Right.
Same concept with the organ. If you play that middle C with a 16-foot stop, you have it an octave low. You have the tone an octave lower.
Okay, so let me just pinpoint that. So the 8-foot stop is the actual pitch.
Yes.
The 16 gives you an octave below. So
Correct.
pretty often you'll use both of those. You'll use the 8 and the 16 to kind of give the pitch, but then beef it up underneath.
Well, so we'll get to the art of registration. Okay, but it's really important to understand. I think people think, well, okay, so they hear this concept. Let me finish fleshing it out. If you draw a 4-foot stop, you're going to hear the C an octave higher. 2-foot, you're going to hear it 2 octaves higher. If you pull the 2 2/3 and you play that middle C, you're going to hear G that's an octave and a half above. And so we'll talk about that. And so it's very easy for someone who's unacquainted with the organ to think this is a pitch generating machine,
Mm.
that I just have tones at different pitches. And that's really not quite the case when you want to think about combining voices and the art of combining voices. What the organ does when it has all of these pitch levels available is it's strengthening various elements of the harmonic sequence.
Okay.
So you always want to have that base level of 8-foot tone. And then when you add or take away from it, it's not, ooh, I'm adding something that's an octave higher. You're strengthening the harmonic sequence in a different way to make the tone sound a bit different.
Is it like almost like I'm trying to think of a visual to describe this. I'm imagining, correct me if I'm wrong, that the 8-foot, let's compare it to like a pillar. 8-foot stops like a general pillar sound, but then if I start adding a 4-foot to it, it kind of opens up a little more. It's a wider sound. And then I add the 2-foot, and it just adds more kind of glow, brilliance to the standard, the basic fundamental.
Yeah, I think that could be a good way to think about it. For the beginning organist that might be watching this, the very, very best thing to do is to go to the organ, play that middle C, and start bringing stops on individually, never releasing the note. And what's going to happen is you will hear those additional octaves or partials come in. They're very audible, and you can kind of orally keep track of those pitches. But the second that you have all of those stops drawn, so the best thing to do is probably do a flute 8-foot, then a flute 4-foot, then the 2 2/3, then a flute 2-foot, and then the flute 1 3/5. And to hear all of those come on in combination.
Mm.
And when you do that, your ear can still aurally track those pitches. But the second that you take your hand off the organ and then restrike it, you have a color.
Okay.
You don't have pitches, you have a color.
All right. So it's like primary colors, additional mixtures of colors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And once you clear the sound and then replay that, you have a particular color that the organ creates. You don't hear the pitches, you hear them all acting in concert one with another. And so you hear an ensemble voice. And when you do that with the flutes at those pitch levels I described, you have a cornet, what's called a cornet, a very typical and unique sound to the organ. The only other time I've heard that sound in orchestral work is from Ravel. There we go.
Bolero.
The Bolero, yeah.
Yeah, because it gradually builds like an organ from the basic to the next sound to the next sound. And each one of those is a new color. Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, just the other day, at the time of this recording, a couple of weeks ago, Brian Wilson, the head of the Beach Boys, just passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching a bunch of interviews with him. A lot of people have been talking about him. And he's like, yeah, when I was in the studio creating good vibrations, I was having so much fun combining instruments. I would take a cello and take a bass guitar and a voice, and they would be playing or singing the exact same pitch, but what was two separate sounds now became a completely new sound, because when I combined those instruments, it's like inventing sounds. That's very much what we're talking about, where an individual sound combined with a different individual sound, which might be an 8-foot stop plus a 4-foot stop, now is the sum of the parts and is a new sound.
That is exactly what we're talking about. And so you don't think of it as different pitches. You think of it as new sound creation. You're creating new timbres.
Yeah.
That's just great. And so the danger always is you can do it in a manner that produces sounds that maybe aren't
very pleasing,
as lovely as others. Right. There is an art to registration.
Which is basically orchestration, right? It's, as a composer myself, I'm thinking, boy, this feels a lot like I'm preparing a piece for an orchestra and trying to decide how much of that pitch do I want. It's a balancing act, right?
Right. And to define registration simply means combining the manner of combining stops together,
Right. Right.
selecting which stops to play at which particular time. So when I say registration, that's what I mean. So you have different families of voices, you have different families of pitches. And then whenever you see a Roman numeral, so all of those pitch levels you see in Latin numerals. When you see a Roman numeral on a stop tab or a stop knob, that's indicative of how many rows of or ranks of pipe are speaking together at the same time.
Ah, I didn't know that.
So when you pull a mixture that has that Roman numeral 4, that is opening up 4 rows or ranks of pipe to speak at the same time.
That's why the increase in volume is pretty dramatic when you go from basic to mixture. Boom, because a whole bunch opens up.
And it's not so much volume, it's the brilliance that it adds, because it's adding higher pitches at different pitch levels. Like it can add the 2 foot and the 2 2/3 and the 1 foot. And of course, organ design is such that it doesn't stay that way for all 61 notes. Some of the high notes will jump down an octave. So you can actually, on an organ, if you draw just the mixture and go note by note, you'll hear when the high pitch drops out and then low pitch comes on in its place.
Gotcha. But that, to your point, it's not necessarily that the volume has increased. It's that what was first a narrow sound has now become a very round sound with lots of colors.
Yes.
Which is different, and we'll get to this later, than those other pedals down by your feet, which go up and down, which look like volume pedals, which is a totally different ballgame.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the newly called organist coming to the organ and going, holy cow, names, numbers, pitches, it can be very daunting. So it's really great to have a baseline. And as I was going into before, I wanted to describe the pitches of the organ. The very fundamental sound, the very basic sound, is the principal stop. So when you are accompanying congregational singing, you want to have an 8-foot principal out. That's the foundation. That is the base that you build on top of.
Great.
And you can round that out by adding 8-foot flutes. But you want to be really judicious about combining stops from different families. That can get you into a little bit of danger, especially as the pitch level increases. Doing that to bolster or strengthen the 8-foot tone, which is the base of what we want to hear, is a good thing. So you can, if you feel like the principal isn't doing enough to fortify that base, you can add the 8-foot flute to round it out. And if you want it to be slightly more incisive as well, you can add the 8-foot string to it. And you can add all 3 of those. Once you get above that 8-foot pitch, you have to be really judicious. If not, don't add stops from different families. So once you go up, when you add the principal 4-foot, which can have different names, it can be an octave, a principal, a montra. There are different names. So it would behoove you to, there are so many resources available online through BYU that where you can identify what stops are in what family. So I'm not going to bore us doing that here.
But so as you get more comfortable and you want to experiment, that's the time. Head to the BYU Organ Workshop website and so on. This might be a good time, unless you want to do something else first, to just, I'm seeing myself now at the organ console. I'm like, okay, I know that I should probably just stick to the grade right now, manual, and at least pull the principal. Right? An 8-foot, maybe a 4-foot to go with it. Now, what if I'm sitting there and I'm going, wait, but it's not loud enough, right? Just using a new organist's words, but it's not loud enough, and the congregation is singing loud, and I'm quiet.
Right.
What do I do?
So there are a few ways that you can navigate through that, and hopefully you're not discovering that when the congregation is singing. Hopefully you've gone and
beforehand
and done a little. And don't be too shocked when it might sound a little louder to you when the room is empty than when it's full.
Definitely.
So it's better when you're alone to overcompensate a little bit toward it being a little bit more present in the room because because bodies suck in sound. And when people are singing, of course, there's more sound going on. But you can do that registrationally. You can do that with your selection of stops, or we can talk about those pedals that you alluded to earlier. So I like to think for soft hymns, like I Need Thee Every Hour or sacrament hymns, my base almost always is having the 8-foot principle, whether or not I choose to bolster that with other families of 8-foot. And then I can add a 4-foot flute. So when I talked about combining families, I'm going to either draw the 4-foot flute or the 4-foot principle, but drawing the 4-foot flute with the 8-foot principle is a nice effect.
Okay, good.
I very rarely go above the 4-foot pitch level when I'm playing soft hymns like sacrament hymns or I Need Thee Every Hour or Abide With Me, hymns like that. I very rarely go above 4-foot pitch. I like to keep it kind of appropriate for the affect of the hymn.
Reverent.
And yeah. And so that's the foundation that I set. Sometimes if I feel like there needs to be just a little bit more for the congregation to latch onto, I'll choose the 4-foot principle rather than the 4-foot flute.
Okay.
Occasionally, if it's a hymn that is soft, but the text of the hymn dictates that it actually be a little bit more present, I will add like a 2-foot flute or something.
Which you might do on a 4th verse, right? Like if it's
Sure.
something like He died, the great Redeemer died, and the last verse is like making a statement, you might want to prepare a little, I forget the exact term, but one of the buttons that's like number 1 or 2.
Right.
Where you can kind of pre-program it. You might want to prepare one of those that adds the 2-foot or adds the principal 4-foot to give it a little bolster between verses.
For the beginning organist, I think it's a-okay to play the entire hymn on your one single registration.
Totally.
And not worry about having to press additional buttons. Those are called pistons. And that brings up an excellent point. Many, especially the newer electronic organs in LDS buildings, will have preset options. Right. They'll have a memory level where you can press those presets or those pistons, and it already has a setting on there. Some older organs might also have that, but those might have been set by someone that you don't know.
Yeah.
And so my advice is to exercise caution when utilizing presets that have been set by somebody other than you.
Yeah. Because
you don't know who did that. And it could actually be a sound that's not great.
Not appropriate even.
So it's actually much better to learn what works together and what doesn't and do it yourself than it is to rely on something that somebody else has done. I've gone to organs and I've pressed those buttons and I've been like, and not just LDS organs. I've gone to other organs when I've been preparing for recitals, and I've been assigned a memory level, and so I'll go through the buttons and make sure they're all empty. And so I press a button and I look at what pops out, and I was like, "That's very interesting,"
or not. Right. Yeah.
So,
well, let's go back to that case in point of sacrament playing, right? Because we were on a roll there. So it's the sacrament hymn. I want to keep it reverent. So we're on the grate. We've got our 8-foot, and maybe we want a little more, so we might add the 4-foot flute. And then if we want even more, maybe the 4-foot principle. But let's stop there. All right. I remember you, and I may be quoting you wrong, so feel free to correct me. But that, one of my original questions was what to do with the volume, right? Because it has that little volume thing, and the down below, where it's almost like a car gas pedal, feels like. There's a couple of those. There's one for the grate, there's one for the swell, and sometimes there's a crescendo pedal, which you told me to just avoid completely as far as I remember. But I'm pretty sure you told me that you generally want to keep those open all the way and control the feel based on which stops are pulled.
Yes. So let's talk about that, because that's a really important point.
Okay.
And going back to the pipe organ, because all electronic organs really are imitative of pipe organs, and so
Right.
it's that's why I continue to go back to talking about the pipe organ, is because really that's the instrument,
Right.
and not to denigrate electronic instruments, because I have one in my home that's awesome, because that's how my kids are able to practice so much and be able to prepare for sacrament meeting. But ultimately, the pipe organ is what all these other electronic instruments are trying to imitate.
Right.
You have the
Right.
organ imitating different voices of the orchestra. You have electronic organs imitating
The pipe organ. Yeah.
pipe organ.
Yeah.
So with the pipe organ, you have divisions that place the pipes either in an unenclosed area of the organ or an enclosed area of the organ.
So like visually, if you were looking at a pipe organ, you can see some of the pipes immediately, but then
Yes.
you might see a box that has little things that open, and inside the box are additional pipes, and sometimes you open them so you can hear them better, and sometimes you keep them closed, right?
That's exactly correct. So most organs, the grate is going to be unenclosed. It's
Okay.
very unusual for a pipe organ to have any aspect of the grate in an enclosure.
Okay.
And so what you pull is what you get, and you can't change the volume, as it were, of that voice.
Because it's not
And so,
enclosed. So
right.
just to like translate for the new person, the actual volume change does not happen on the grate because the pipe is the pipe. You pull the thing, it sounds the way it sounds. If there's any
Yep.
variation in sound, it's inside the box, which you can gradually open or gradually close. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct. And that's why the swell division is actually called swell.
Because the sound
Is
swells
because
based
you
on.
can make the sound swell without changing the timbre.
Gotcha.
So you can have the timbre that you want, and then you can have it be expansive or not. So the swell is going to have all of their pipes in a box. And like you said, on the front of that box are doors that or blinds, as it were, that open and close, just like blinds for your window. And so that that dictates how much of the sound is getting out or being contained inside the enclosure.
Okay.
And so that's very useful to create effect, but can be a little bit dangerous, because like you said, it's probably better to approach it changing the volume based on your stop selection rather than,
Moving the
because
pedal thing up and down.
there have been times where, you can have you can forget about the pedal. So yeah, so those enclosures are controlled by that pedal that you talked about that's above the note pedals that you play,
Mhm.
that you move up and down.
Yeah.
When you push it the bottom all the way down, that's closed. When you push it open like this, that's open.
So okay.
And that can be a little dangerous. There can be times where you forget that it's all the way closed, and the sound that you produce when you begin the introduction of the hymn is way too soft,
Yeah.
and then you have to open it up, and it can be sudden or not. Right.
Or vice
Right.
versa, you can forget that something's all the way open and it's the
Right.
sacrament hymn. Went, whoa, too much.
Right. So really great rule of thumb is to pretend like there is no enclosure and have everything open, and then
Ah,
select your stops. You don't want to think of it all the way closed. It's far
okay.
better to just have it all the way open and think about it that way, and then let your stop selection.
Which is counterintuitive for a new organist because you look at the dial, and
Mhm.
if you're going to open up the grate all the way, it's going to look like it's max volume.
Right.
But it depends what stops are pulled. So you're saying
Right.
leave it open all the way and then control it based on, do I have an 8-foot?
Right. You'll get yourself into trouble if you envision those pedals like a volume knob on a
on a
stereo.
radio. Okay.
You'll get yourself into a little bit of trouble that way, because you think, oh, I can just adjust it that way. It's far better to understand what the families of stops are and what they do and how to combine them in such a manner to produce the timbre and the amplitude that you want.
Nice.
And that's why have it all the way open is really the best thing to do.
Okay, so while we're
Then you mentioned the crescendo pedal.
let's talk about the crescendo pedal.
The crescendo pedal progressively brings on stops until when it's fully open, you have almost all of the stops that are available. That can get you in big trouble. As a beginner, it's far better to learn the stops and learn what they do than to try and rely on that. Um, there have been times when probably every organist has had the experience where they go to start a hymn and they forgot about the crescendo pedal. And if they used it previously, it might be open, or if you nicked it with your foot and you
Right.
didn't realize,
Yeah.
and it's open. And so you go to start a hymn and you're like, oh, that's not at all
Yeah.
what I wanted. In fact, it has happened in general conference as well. So, 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 so even the best organists are not immune to that kind of a thing. So it is one of those dangerous elements of the organ that I'm so accustomed when I'm at an organ with a crescendo pedal, I am so accustomed to just unconsciously reaching my foot over and making sure that's closed before I begin any playing. Because it's just one of those things.
Danger
It
zone.
can be very useful, especially depending on the repertoire you're playing. Sometimes it's called for.
It's much more of an advanced thing. It's not for
Yeah,
a beginner. If you're a beginner,
right.
just ignore the crescendo, keep it all the way down, and don't worry about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. We were talking about sacrament hymns.
Mhm.
Since we're kind of on this topic still, like let's give some suggestions for various types of hymns. Let's just start with two, right? You might have a more reverent hymn, and you might have a more not boisterous but energetic. We thank thee, O God, for a prophet, or guide us, O thou great Jehovah. What are a couple of basic registrations I can count on? It's my first
Yeah.
Sunday. How do I think of that?
So for quieter hymns, we already discussed having that 8-foot foundation with the principal drawn, and then drawing other 8 foots as you deem necessary. And then perhaps adding that 4-foot flute or the 4-foot principal, and perhaps the 2-foot flute, but
Probably not.
not often. Yeah.
Yeah.
For hymns such as Redeemer of Israel or High on the Mountain Top or We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet, you definitely want to have that 8-foot foundation. And then you're going to build what's called a principal chorus. You're going to have 8-foot, 4-foot, and 2-foot principal stops.
Okay.
And you can also add the mixture if you so desire.
The mixture will give it a nice, strong, full feel.
It will. Yeah. And if you're especially boisterous after a few weeks of getting comfortable at the organ and you want that last verse to really pop, you can pull the 8-foot trumpet for the last verse.
Oh yeah.
Which really adds gusto to that last verse.
Definitely.
If the trumpet's nice. There are some of our older model of LDS organists, that trumpet can actually be
A problem.
more distracting than triumphant. And so of course be judicious, but also don't be too afraid of it.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Those two basics, right? Because we can probably fit the entire hymn book into more reverent hymns versus more energetic hymns, and that will get us started. That's really great. Now, what about the difference between playing when the congregation is singing and playing like before the meeting begins? I'm playing prelude. I'm trying to set a reverent tone. Should we be doing anything different with our stops in that situation?
So this is where utilizing the expression pedal can be useful, where you want the particular timbre sound, but you do want it to be more subdued.
Okay.
You'll close the box. You can utilize those pedals to make it softer.
Okay.
If you want that ethereal sound that I was talking about, you can pull the string in the celeste and utilize that. That's a really great sound for something that is, I mean, because it imitates the string section of the orchestra, where the strings, because of how they play, you have that undulating effect or that rich full sound rather than undulation. Some organs, if you hear that undulation between the two stops, it can actually be what's going on here rather than kind of hearing it more as a broadening of the tone.
Interesting.
But so you can utilize something like that. You can fill it out with the 8-foot flute. So you could have the 8-foot flute, the 8-foot string, and the 8-foot celeste. And that's a pretty good place to start when you're thinking about the general tone setting that we do in LDS meetings of having it being soft. I hesitate always to use the word reverent because reverence doesn't always have to be soft and quiet and
Very true.
church mouth folded. There are very reverent pieces that are very,
Powerful.
very powerful.
Yeah, that's very
So that's why I am hesitant to use the word reverence, although that is how we generally think
That's
about
kind
it.
of how we talk about it, like,
Yeah.
reverently, quietly, da da da. That's kind of in our vernacular of thinking of that word.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fair point that you make. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about different. How does the organ work? Learning about the different ranks, some basics of playing. Let's go into one more basic of playing. We're going to definitely have you back if you're willing to come back
Okay.
to talk
Yeah.
about some of these topics in more depth, because obviously we cannot cover all of this in one sit down. So we'll definitely get deeper into some techniques in later videos. Let's talk about one more technical thing, and then I want to get to some broader questions about what's the role of the organ in our services,
Okay.
what's the role of music, so on. So this one more technical thing is the feet. All right.
Yes.
So when I'm starting, should I even try the feet? I mean, you might have a bass coupler, you might not have a bass coupler. Like, let's talk me through my feet.
When you're starting, you should definitely not use your feet. It's something that you definitely have to practice. It's something that unless you're a kind of a savant at the organ, it won't come intuitively.
Right.
And it's just a landmine of potential failure, or getting in the way of an otherwise more successful recitation of the hymn. Where and so you bring up the bass coupler. People might not know what that is. On electronic organs, you can have this. It can either be a piston or a stop that says bass coupler or something like that. Some older Rogers instruments just say bass on it.
Okay.
And what that does is that's a mechanism whereby it pulls the stops that are drawn for the pedal and puts them on the bottom note of the manuals that you're playing.
So when I play
Now
a C below middle C, I'm not just getting the foot C below middle C. I'm also getting extra octave beneath it.
Yes. So you're getting what the stops that are drawn in the pedal.
In the pedal, yeah.
So you have to have stops employed in the pedal in order to do that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So if you're playing that C major chord and you have that bottom C, it's going to have that 16-foot tone, which really enriches and fortifies that.
Yeah.
It really undergirds that foundation really well. For the beginning or for the newly called organist, it depends on your skill at the piano. It depends on your keyboard ability as to how efficacious that can be. You have to play the chords at the same time. And if you lift that note, it's possible that it catches the tenor.
Right.
Or it matters. It matters how you attack the keys.
Okay, let's talk about it. So on a piano, even playing normal hymns, a lot of us get into the habit as pianists of doing a little bit of a roll to a chord.
Right.
Whether it's because it's the end of a phrase or because it's the start of a verse. Sometimes we do a little bit of a roll with our fingers whereby one note happens first, and it's pretty quick. They're almost in a blink of an eye, but they're not precisely at the same time. So this has happened to me when I've been using the bass coupler, where I accidentally slip into piano mode instead of organ mode, and my top fingers actually strike the keys slightly before my left hand pinky or bass note strikes the key, and then we don't hear the low bass note because it wasn't struck simultaneously.
Or that low bass note plays the tenor.
Right. Yeah, depending
either instance can happen.
Yeah, depending on the register. Because I think it only goes up to middle C, but sometimes it's only up to a B, depending on
that's dependent upon the instrument and the maker of the instrument. But you're correct. That can be a little finicky. it requires your technique to be just a little more solid.
Yeah.
Now, I would definitely for the beginning organist, if you can handle that for hymn singing, I would absolutely recommend using the bass coupler because you want that 16-foot tone on the bottom note.
Yeah.
You want
Supports.
that. You want the effect of playing the pedal because it really fortifies and is really really useful in accompanying hymn singing.
It's sort of the wind beneath the
So
wings of the singers, right? It gives us this base foundation upon which we can feel better about singing full voice.
absolutely, absolutely. So if you get to the organ and you put that bass coupler on and you have your 16 foot pulled in the pedal and you can do that to some degree of success, absolutely do it. If you have moderate success, still do it.
Yeah.
It's only if it becomes really obviously obtrusive that I would not do it. But if you can do it most of the time or a lot of the time, do
Do it.
it.
Yeah.
The congregation wants that foundation.
Yeah.
So don't stray away from doing that. The caveat to that is also don't let it become such a crutch that you never ever
Learn
learn
the
the pedal.
pedals.
Start practicing, start learning the pedal as much as possible. And I guess that comes to something that maybe I could have said in the beginning for the newly called organist is embrace the calling and come to the instrument and practice. It's so rewarding.
It
It's
really is. It
such a
really is.
rewarding instrument to play.
Let me offer a tip, sort of as the advocate of the pianist who gets called to be the organist, because I've been there. I'm still not amazing at the pedals, but something that has helped me become a little better without spending tons of time practicing, because I don't have, unfortunately, I would love to have time every day to get over to the church and practice. That'd be amazing. I just don't have the time. But something that I can do that's helped me is when I'm playing the sacrament hymns, many of them, or other slower, easier to manage hymns, I'll have the bass coupler on, so I'm always backed up by the bass sound, but I'll start playing with my feet as well, which won't change the sound because the bass coupler is already playing the pedal sound in the left hand, but it helps me in a bit of a safety net to start playing with my feet until I can take off the bass coupler and just play with them. That's helped me kind of find an in between to learn.
That's really neat. I'd never considered that. So that's really neat.
That's helped me a lot. Yeah. Cool. Okay. I think we've done a great job of setting up a basic. We can get you through the first couple weeks now and then giving you some resources about where to go next, unless there's anything else you want to add to that.
Well, no, I was just going to say, since it sounds like you want to have me back, if when people watch this and they have questions
Yes.
or things that they want you and I to talk about, like that could be helpful because surely there will be in this brief discussion, even though we've probably been going for an hour now, it still feels brief. Surely there are things that we haven't considered to talk about when people are newly called and come to the
Yes.
instrument.
So please comment below. Please ask questions. We will very much take note and bring Jason back to handle this. And maybe there's situations we haven't thought of that you're in. Maybe it's a specific organ. What do I do in this case? Like, I'll give you an example, and we don't have to answer this right now, but in our stake, we attend the stake center, and the organ is a little bit old. So it actually has the stops that you pull, not the buttons that you push, and it does not have any pre-programmed memory. But, we share our stake center with another stake. So if it's their stake conference, we get kicked out, and we got to go to another building in the stake. And that building has a brand new organ, which is completely different than the organ I play every Sunday. And it's the buttons you push. And it has the pre-programmed, like 10 different pre-programmed things. But I cannot figure out how to set my own stops and change in the middle of a verse because it erases my memory. So sometime I want to pick your brain on that. I cannot figure out how to tell it to let me set the memory. But if you have other questions like that, put them down in the comments. We will come back and address those. So, okay, let's shift our conversation now to two big topics. And again, this could be a bit of a can of worms. We'll see where we go with this. But let's first talk about what is the role of the organ and congregational singing in worship, because that really can inform us in our calling and help us realize what potential we have to increase worship in sacrament meeting from the organ bench, right?
Mhm.
And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the new hymn selections and ask you for some tips about how do we handle some of these new challenges that we're facing. So, okay, what is the role of the organ in our worship services?
um, it should come as no surprise from someone who's spent their entire life dealing with the instrument, learning it, loving it, that I hold the organ in the highest esteem. I think it's no mistake. I don't think that it's any accident that the organ is the instrument of worship.
Mhm.
And not just in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It really, truly is the instrument of worship in Christianity. So much so that when Christianity expands past Western civilization into places where it might not be so prominent, you see those civilizations embracing the pipe organ. You see them embracing that in their worship and in their concert halls.
Right.
Most of the Far Eastern concert halls that have been built in the last 50 years have excellent pipe organs, and a lot of them are imports from from some of the greatest builders in the United States. So it's really interesting to see that as that expands, that the organ is something that's considered very primary in that expansion, especially outside of our church. You see African Catholic and Anglican congregations thirsty for organ and choir repertoire. I mean, you see that happen. And so it's not just, our LDS church that has our little electronic organ. The organ truly is the instrument of worship. And I think that um, there are several reasons for that. You see the visual impact of a pipe organ, especially in a beautiful church. It's something that is majestic. Most organs are very majestic, that they have the visual impact of the organ is something that's very impressive. Also, due to its nature, the length of the pipes, and that they're always placed in a vertical manner, it's something that draws the eye up.
Mhm.
It's something that elevates.
Yeah.
So even from a visual impact, it's something that is drawing our eyes up. And as we learned from Elder Christofferson in the last conference, worship is something that's imitative. It's something that draws us toward Heavenly Father in imitative fashion. And so when you have that visual impact of looking up, something that's drawing our eyes up, that's causing us to, even in the visual impact, it's something where it's elevating, it's pointing us in a direction.
It almost reminds me, I hadn't thought of this till you just said that, of, in the temple, you get to the celestial room and there's usually a big chandelier, and it draws the attention upward, which is really the whole point of why we're there, to draw our attention up to God. So even in sacrament meeting, same thing, the symbol of the organ to have us looking up is powerful.
Yes. And the organ, by its nature being a wind instrument, is something that that draws parallel with our own instruments.
Singing.
Our instruments are wind instruments that we join together in singing. The organ, more than any other instrument, is really the only instrument that can be whisper quiet, that can just have the most ethereal whisper quiet affect, or can be thunderous in its volume, in its presence.
Yeah.
And having that breath, that enormous capability of sonic production, is really something. I mean, when you hopefully a newly called organist might seek out opportunities to go to places that have fine pipe organs and go to recitals and hear what the organ can do.
And not be
But
intimidated,
it
but to be inspired by, wow, this gives me a voice in a way I've never had before. And that's something I've really enjoyed, is finding ways to express my testimony when my mouth is closed, but my fingers are going and I'm on the organ. Because like take a hymn like hymn 85, How Firm a Foundation. It's pretty common that we'll sing the seventh verse
Mhm.
either in place of a third verse or as a fourth time through, especially like
Right.
maybe in a big state conference where the congregation is standing and we're really going for it, you know? And you can really comment, like it's almost like commentary on scripture from the organ by the way you bolster the singing. And you can really enhance that spirit of worship. Like at Christmas time, also Christmas and Easter, it's like, you know what? This is why we're here. It's like
Yeah.
I feel like it's my responsibility, and I have failed if I have not found a way, even if it's very simple, doesn't have to be technically challenging, to use the voice of the organ in a way that draws our attention to the majesty and grandeur of doctrine we are celebrating through the music. It's a really cool opportunity to communicate in a powerful.
Absolutely. And there's really no other instrument that can do it. The it's no mistake that organs are the instrument that are utilized for congregational singing as well. It's the instrument that supports congregational singing. Many organs envelop the congregation and inspire greater participation in congregational song.
Yeah.
Um, I'll see on a lot of the Facebook groups a lot of questions. Oh, can't I just take this pianistic hymn to the piano? Well, of course you can, but is that really the best thing to do to support congregational singing? In fact, there's a quote by Alexander Schreiner that I won't I it might be interesting to look up, but he really does talk about the organ being the instrument that more than any other is most suited and appropriate to supporting congregational singing.
Yeah. If you don't know
And
who Schreiner is, he was a tabernacle organist many years ago, many decades ago, but also one of the like preeminent organists in the world and very, very powerful composer as well. We sing many of his hymns in our hymn book. He's a great musician in the church.
he was one of the most influential organists of the early 20th century.
Yeah.
He just really had a great influence in that and in church music.
Right.
But in that quote talks about the piano being the least effective instrument for congregational singing. And I think that's true, as hard as that might be for folks to hear, or they might quibble with it, but I think it's really true. The organ is really and that's why you see it in use in every church that promotes congregational singing.
And when we go to general conference, it's the organ is not just used because there's 21,000 people in the room. It's what we're talking about. It's this very important instrument of worship that creates experience and atmosphere that's very unique, which you cannot get with the piano.
Yeah. And so, but by its physical characteristics, by its sonic characteristics, every characteristic of the organ makes it the most suitable instrument for worship. It's really such a majestic instrument, an intimate instrument, an expressive instrument. It really, so many people describe its voice as the voice of God. The instrument that most closely, short of full symphony orchestras, short of having 105 players on the stage in a full symphonic work, short of that, it's truly the one musical instrument that can offer all of that.
But even in those
Uh,
situations, when composers really want to make a statement, they'll add the organ to the
yeah,
full orchestra because there's this extra power.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's manifest perhaps most effectively in Saint-Saëns' Third Symphony. If people want to, most people might know that already, the organ symphony. But if not, I mean, going on YouTube and finding Pavel Yarvy's recording in Royal Albert Hall. I mean, just
Yes. You've probably seen
yeah,
Anna Lapwood online playing it. She's now the famous pop culture organist, fabulous classical musician, but she plays that quite often. So I'm sure you can
yeah.
find a recording of the Saint-Saëns. Yeah, it's a great piece. Okay, so organ in worship. Yeah, we've
Oh,
touched on that.
so
It's really important.
yeah,
Keep going.
I'm gonna keep expounding a little bit.
Dude,
The organ in worship. So we talk about its characteristics that make it so fitting, and I appreciate the comments that you've made talking about the affect that it can have, the power that it can have to really to really highlight the texts that are expounding true doctrine, that are expounding the doctrine, the gospel, that are teaching the gospel. And so you have the organ that is able to transmit the hymn in the most effective way. Because of the nature of the organ and the way that you draw stops, you can hear individual voices far better than you can on other instruments, which is conducive to singing. I get comments every so often, and perhaps a little more often, because when you talk about the last hymns and last verses and what we can do on that, it's not just what we can do on the organ registrationally, it's also what we can do with the hymn itself. It's probably important to note that when we talk about hymns, first and foremost, when we say this is a hymn, we talk about the text.
right.
The hymn is the text, and those texts are married to hymn tunes or melodies. So when we talk about the hymn, it's a hymn text that's married to a melody. Now, in our current time today, we associate texts and tunes together very clearly.
Right.
There are people that like to take hymn of 1 meter and take a tune that shares the meter but isn't the tune we normally know and kind of put it together. And while that is certainly doable, sometimes it feels more like a parlor trick than something that more effectively transmit the text, especially when you're taking a text that's so wed to a particular tune. But it's important to note that the 4-part harmony that you find written in the hymnal is only one possible harmonization or realization of that tune as well. And so we do have a tradition of part singing in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, although that seems to be waning a little bit as it becomes more and more difficult to put choirs together, and with the contraction of the Sunday morning services, with the getting rid of Sunday school and shortening the block, and we've kind of seen hymns where they were utilized in various aspects of the Sunday morning where they really aren't as much anymore.
Right.
And so we do see kind of a decline a little bit in the usage of music in our services outside of especially outside of sacrament meeting. But the 4-part realization that we see in our hymnals is only one possibility. And so as the organist develops and hones their skills, they can begin to utilize 4 last verses, harmonizations that perhaps are a bit different, but are effective mechanisms to transmit the text, to bring people together.
Right.
And I am a strong, strong proponent of unison singing.
Amen.
There is nothing that we do in our worship and in the church where we all are doing the exact same thing at the exact same time than unison singing.
Yes.
When we are all joining together in one voice,
Yes.
in one accord, singing together the hymns of Zion, there's nothing that we do that's more unifying.
Or powerful, honestly, like the impact. This is slightly technical, but it proves the point a little bit. When you're writing music for voices, if you're writing for a choir, let's say, sometimes you think, oh, I can be really powerful by adding more notes to my chords. But actually, with a choir or the congregation, that actually lessens the impact because you're dividing the voices more. When you bring voices into unison, even if it's octaves with the women singing an octave higher than the men, that unison singing is just louder because you're not dividing it. There's a doctrinal point there of division versus unity. And if you are not one, you are not mine. And unison singing creates the unity of voice, but also the power of sheer volume that kind of expands what we're doing here. That we are called with that trumpet of Moroni to preach the gospel loud and clear. And hey, unison singing does it.
Right. And I mean, we talk about unification where everyone is all together one, where we're all doing the same thing together. And of course, people might have in their minds thinking about talks by Elder Holland talking about harmony and how we bring together through harmony, where we can be harmonious as different but achieving one thing. But I think there's even more power when we're all unified together. And you talk about volume, but there's just something that's so incredibly powerful about joining together in one voice, truly in one voice, where we're all singing the same words to the same melody that is so powerful. And so oftentimes, especially with powerful hymns, I'll variate the harmony on the last verse, which kind of pushes a little bit the congregation into unified singing.
Yeah, because they can't sing the same parts or it'll sound like that's not what the organ is playing. But it helps, it gives you more opportunity to kind of like share your testimony. You have to be careful because if your harmony goes too out there, it's like, I don't even know what to sing anymore. So you have to be careful. But
yeah. And we're in the Church of Jesus Christ, we're just not quite accustomed to doing that anymore. That's an art that has passed us by a little bit. In many other Christian common denominations, that's just how you do it. Everyone knows
where you're at right now. You're sitting in an Episcopalian church in Cincinnati in your office, and that's like every Sunday you guys do that. And when I was composer in residence there, sometimes write those alternate harmonizations specifically for what we were doing there. And boy, does it add a great possible feel, right? So once I started getting comfortable as the ward organist, I started doing some of that too. First and foremost, I'm a composer, so I was excited to try some of that. But my congregation was not used to that. And at first it was like they stopped singing because they didn't know what was happening.
Right.
But after a few times they were like, oh, I get it. And then I had people coming up to me saying, why didn't you do that different thing in the last verse today? Like I was waiting for it. I thought it was coming, right? They wanted it after a while. So you can kind of train your congregation a little.
And that's so wonderful that people are willing to come up to you and express that. It's one of those things where you're kind of tipping the apple cart a little bit. It's amazing how comfortable people seem to be to come up and let you know what they think about
how loud
about what you do with the organ, about how loud it is, or I found it difficult to sing my part. And yet there are so many other people that crave that kind of an experience, because it is something that's elevating, it's energizing, it's invigorating, it's something that does uh, allow the spirit to bear greater testimony to
Yeah.
you of the truthfulness of the gospel.
And just because they're not
And
used
so
to it doesn't mean that they won't enjoy it, right? They just don't even know a lot of the time that that's something that can be great. So
right,
little by little, introducing some of those things can
right.
be really helpful.
And so, we as organists have great ability to impact or serve as a conduit for the spirits to have greater impact in the lives of the congregant as they come to worship and renew covenants through the sacrament.
Yes.
Uh, that as we take that approach, that we are utilizing the talents that Heavenly Father has given us to serve as a conduit to allow the Holy Ghost to do that. And man, the Spirit can surely testify when you have the impact of great music. When
Definitely.
there is music that is so capable by its nature of allowing for that impact. Now, conversely, there is music that serves as a deterrent, and so we don't want to we don't ever want to do something that detracts from the Spirit. But just because we're not playing the harmonies that are in the book where people want to sing that particular harmony, that's not a deterrent of the spirits.
Okay, we've brought up this idea about harmony here. Um, we're going to have you back to talk about harmony at some point too, 'cause that's another big topic. But I just want to pinpoint, you know, I've heard multiple times. I've heard many of my students who are writing music but came to it through the organ say, I was at a BYU organ workshop and somebody said, if you want to be a better organist, you need to study harmony.
Hmm.
And that's a question we could dedicate a whole interview to, which we won't right now. But I have found that to be so true, not just because I'm biased as a composer, but there is a sense of being able to understand how to play more intuitively when I understand a little bit more. Not that you have to have a degree in harmony or anything, just a basic understanding. In fact, I put together, I have a little free course. If anybody wants it, I'll put the link down description that helps kind of introduce an organist to some additional things they can do to like substitute a chord. And maybe it's only one chord that you substitute, but like, oh, I could use this chord at this point instead of this chord to create that thing that you were talking about of a slight alternate harmonization. So it's like 7 little lessons about 7 ways you can do that. I'll put it down below, but sometime we're gonna have you back to talk about that because
Sure.
it's an interesting topic of increasing your ability to play through understanding the harmony. It's almost like learning how to feel the spirit more by certain kinds of scripture study, learning the
Mhm.
syntax, learning the method of speaking, or whatever those things might. Okay, but let's. We've taken a lot of your time, and I don't want to take too much more. But I have one more big topic I want to chat about today. We don't have to go back too long about it. We can talk about it another time too. But we have a new reality with the new hymns that have been coming out. And there's a lot of opinions going on, especially like in the online Facebook groups and things. In fact, I heard someone quote Elder Renlund. Whether he said this or not, I'm not 100% sure, but it's, secondhand. But it was almost like, I think the war in heaven was fought over the new hymns being released, right? Because there's so many opinions going on about why do I like this? Why do I not like this? What? We're not going to get into that today. We're going to set that aside. Let's talk about the practicality of I'm the ward organist. There's all these, I think now to this point, there's 48 newly released hymns, and some of them are very much songs that
Mhm.
like actual primary songs that are going to be published in the book, and it says for home and church use, so that makes sense that there's some mixing from what they're doing. What do I do? Maybe it's Gethsemane, or it's This Little Light of Mine, or it's Because. These are more piano kind of songs, but I'm at the organ. And I want to
Mhm.
use the organ because, as we've said, it's the instrument of worship. Can you give me a couple of tips about how I can manage to play these tastefully at the organ?
It's such an interesting question, and it can be very difficult to grapple with, especially for folks who are less comfortable at the organ and maybe don't have the kind of musical training that might serve well, like the theoretical background you were talking about of studying harmony, because
Right.
those kinds of aspects will come in. They're helpful a little bit, but um, like you said, uh, I think the personal position statement is that we should utilize the organ whenever we can. Many people will make the argument that it doesn't matter, or since they are more idiomatic to the piano, that's where we should go. And I would make the case that congregational singing is best served when accompanied at the organ. And so hopefully every attempt could be made to come to the organ for those. It is true that many of them are idiomatic for the piano, and there is an art in taking something that's idiomatic to a different instrument and taking it to your instrument. And how do you make it something that works on your instrument, or how do you present it in such a way that where it is more idiomatically appropriate on the organ?
Yeah.
You bring up that these new hymns are for use in a multitude of applications. There are so many people I see that want to make the argument that um, because it says these are all appropriate for any church service application, that we should therefore use them. And I think that there I think that some degree of prudence can be utilized even in the selection of these. I understand the argument of people saying, "Oh, the songs that people hear in primary, if we do them in sacrament meeting, that will engender uh, more participation from the primary in use." Well, there's nothing to say that utilizing the great hymns of Zion in sacrament meeting will also build familiarity with primary children and allow them to have that great relationship with that. So
Same.
I'm not I'm not completely convinced that we need to pigeonhole into our sacrament meetings every
Every selection.
every selection. There are some that are more appropriate in the primary room. There are some that are more appropriate in the Relief Society room. There are some that are more appropriate in when you're utilizing when you're having family home evening, or when you're engaged in personal or family scripture study and you want to incorporate music more into your own personal devotions. Um, I think that there are certainly places for that, and that we don't necessarily have to feel obliged to cram every new release. Uh, and doing so can actually build fatigue of unfamiliarity as well. When you
True.
keep introducing things that are so unfamiliar, you can fatigue a congregation. Here
Definitely.
at St. Thomas, even in the Episcopal tradition, we're we're judicious with how many new hymns that we introduce to the congregation.
Yeah.
There are 720 hymns in the Episcopal hymnal, and
It's
we
a
don't
lot.
utilize all of
Yeah.
them.
Right.
You can tire a congregation or turn them off if you introduce too much that's new. So with all of that serving as a caveat, of course, when you are confronted with having to do that, um, there is, I think that some of the releases are overly complicated. I think that there's a lot of notes in them that perhaps don't have to be played. And this is where that harmonic knowledge really can come into play,
Definitely.
where you can simplify.
Leave
You can
things
utilize,
out. Right. What do I have to have? What's non-negotiable, and what can I tastefully leave out? And
right.
that's easier said than done in many cases.
It absolutely is. It's far easier to say than to do it in practice, which is probably why you do have to approach it that way. I do know that there are some efforts by some of the hymn book committee members and students at BYU to release to release PDFs of some of these in something that's more approachable at the organ. So it would behoove those who are assigned to play those to maybe look for those resources. And who knows, maybe perhaps you and I can do that as well and provide whatever links that you say that can be provided.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ultimately, when I'm tasked with playing some of these, I try as much as I can to turn it into a 4-part hymn. I don't do the pianistic arpeggiation at the organ. When I'm faced with a primary song or some of these new releases that are more pianistic in nature, I utilize I may try to make it more 4-part like. And so that involves using the pedal to sustain the root of the chord, and to kind of turn it into a way where the melody is still there, but trying in a manner to make it more singable for the congregation. So that can be done by making it, getting rid of some of the arpeggiation, sustaining that bottom note, filling in the chords and allowing that to go. I think that's probably a good start. But again, like you said, that does require a little bit of that harmonic knowledge of what's going on.
They have been adding chord symbols to each of these new selections, which we did not have in the 1985 hymnal. They are in the Primary Children's Songbook, of course. Those can be helpful when you're doing that. So, like, I'm not thinking of one of them new. I'm thinking of kind of an older hymn in our book, a primary book of, like, I don't know if you can hear.
Yeah.
That's so pianistic. But, like, what if you're singing that in sacrament? I hope they call me on a mission. I mean, the chord symbol up above, it'll just say F for an F major chord. You can simply hold an F major chord in your left hand, let's say, and play the melody in your right hand. Like, that might be one way to start, whether it's this level out of mine or whatever, is to use the chord symbols more.
Yeah. And some of these new hymns are hard. You bring up This Little Light of Mine. I actually think that's really hard because it's rhythmically complex.
There's a lot of syncopations in a lot of these new things, like tam, tam, tam.
Right. And not only is that difficult to play, it's difficult to sing. That's a great example of a hymn that might be, or one of the new releases that might be better served approaching with caution, because congregation's going to really struggle with that. And I mean, we look at these new, it's new, it's shiny. We look at the object like, oh, it's a new shiny object, and we want to play with it. And we might have our personal biases of, oh, I love it too. But it might not work so much. But if you're having to play that, I mean, if we pull that up and I look at it, those are hymns. Because I'm trying to think of hymns for home and church. And so if we look at that one, This Little Light of Mine, and if I look at that, and so if I'm trying to play this at the organ, this one actually works at the organ because the accompaniment is rather simple in that you have that G major chord with the passing tone and the pedal down. You just have the passing bass line down to the G chord in second inversion. So this one at the organ is one where I'd probably hold that G chord, this little light of mine, and it's really work out that syncopation so that you're really strong with it. And this is one of those places where if you felt adventurous, you could do that accompaniment onto the softer swell, something with softer swell, and then do the melody on the grate, which would help the congregation.
Because they'll hear the tune more clearly instead of it mixing in with the other voices.
Right.
That's a good point. It just brings up a thought of, if you would like us to make a couple of videos, maybe even of these specific hymns where we pull it up on screen and we get Jason at the organ and even like show where he's putting his hand, we could do some of that potentially. If that's interesting to you, drop it in the comments and we'll take a look at it. That, at the very least, we could probably pull up some sheet music in another video and write out some other possibilities that you could try.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Jason, been so helpful. Thank you for your time. And it's funny because it opens up all these other questions that I have for you, which again, we're going to have to bring you back and do several other in a series of ward organist survival guide sort of idea. I really appreciate your thoughts here today and all the help you've given. And everybody who's listening, again, if you have additional questions, please do feel free to drop them in the comments below. We will do our best to respond to those and make some additional videos. But also check out the resources that are available. Go to the BYU organ page, and I'll put a link down in the description box. And there's other things, like you can go to jackmanmusic.com and find books of manual only preludes, which might be really nice for you as you're new to play some prelude music that's not just a straight hymn, but does not require you to play the pedals. They're written specifically so you just use your hands, and it can give you some additional things to play with. So there's a lot of resources, but get to the organ, try it out, sit there, get a key to the church, find a way to get in there and mess around and figure some of this out. Yeah. So, any last words you'd like to say of encouragement to these newly called
Well,
struggling organists?
I hope in our long conversation that I've been able to say something that was helpful. And I love the organ, so I hope that folks, as they get this calling, that they can find joy in the service as well and learn to love the organ despite how intimidating and frustrating it possibly can be for someone who's newly initiated.
I think that's the key point, really, of this whole conversation is the intent is to increase the strength of our worship. And so, it's kind of like when you get called to be the gospel doctrine teacher. That might be the most intimidating calling you ever have. But what can you do with what you have to magnify your calling? And maybe to you, that means I've never even read this chapter before, so I'm going to read it and maybe look up a few footnotes. That might be the best you can do to magnify your calling, but you did it. In a similar way at the organ, maybe all you can do to magnify your calling is just pull that principal 8-foot and practice for 20 minutes before sacrament. Okay, but do it. But do it with the intent of, let's see what I can do to help enhance the worship experience. Because in the end of the day, that's what it's all about. That's why we come to church. We don't come to church for concerts. We don't come to church to pick at the organist. We don't come to pick at the bishop either, right? It's all about the worship. So hopefully what we've shared today can help you in that. And we'll be back again definitely to share some more helpful tips. So thanks for sitting with us and listening, and we'll see you next time.